Hello, my name is Jeffrey Watson,
And I'm Ethan Edwards.
and this is the Ridge Podcast.
Today we're interviewing Jamie Edwards, also known as my father.
Yes, sir. But thank you, Jamie. Thank you for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll try not to be too unprofessional, and we'll try not to hide any details that. We start. But my jacket's on outside.
But though he is Ethan's dad, he's also a very interesting guy, so we're lucky to have him on today. I want to kind of let Ethan lead the interview today, really, since it is his father.
Yeah.
So Ethan, take her away.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Carroll County. Actually grew up in Cana, which most people really don't know because we've lived in Gladesburg and Groundhog Mountain and Hillsville for so long. Actually moved, your mom and I moved from Cana in 1990. I moved in 1997, then 1999, and have not been back.
So where did you grow up for elementary school?
St. Paul.
St. Paul.
So at that time, St. Paul was K through 9.
Yeah.
So that was an immediate transition from 9th grade to the high school in 10th grade. And that was a that was a shock to the system.
Yeah.
It was a pleasant shock for me, but it was still, when you're in the same place for 10 years, that is not only the same place, but a really small place. That was, Carroll County High School seemed really big then.
Was you scared to go to Carroll County High School? Because I know, like, leaving a place you've been so long is kind of nerve-wracking.
I think there were certainly apprehensive thoughts, and even back then, not as much so now, and during my day and time in the 90s, not as much so before my time, but there was this we versus them mentality. We meaning those of us not from Hillsville, and they meaning those of us not from Cana.
Yeah.
And there was that dividing line.
That's still here today.
Yeah.
The Cana kids are proud if they're from Cana.
Yeah.
And they let you know it too. And yeah, it's a good thing, but there still is that disconnect almost from people below the mountain and people on top of the mountain.
And I find it worse for kids that spent 6th and 7th grade down at St. Paul instead of coming up like everyone else from all the elementary schools would during 6th grade. And it works for some kids and that's great, but you can tell they're a bit more disconnected socially.
And it's kind of weird because, I mean, Carroll County's not that big, but I mean, they let you know where they're from.
Yeah. And
So-
with St. Paul being where it is geographically, it makes it feel bigger.
It does. We were, less your mother, but more me, caught during the period of time. Ronnie mentioned Lambsburg School, and there was Mount Bether. So there was many elementary schools that only went to, I think, 6th grade.
Yeah.
Then those students fed into St. Paul for 7th, 8th, and 9th. So there was this flow of a really small number of kids coming from Mount Bethel and Lambsburg, but the greatest majority, we were together for 10 years. And that was the best of all the worlds, but also not sometimes too, because we were together for 10 years. During that period of time, the 90s was a different time. It was not, sometimes it's hard to put your finger on what's different, but my generation's kind of caught in the middle between baby boomers and a much more modern generation that's never known anything but the internet, right? And we were kind of caught in the middle. The first time I saw the internet was 1990. This is a total sidebar, but 1995 at Surrey Community College. And one of my best friends who worked for the college, his name was Andy, showed me this this program with this big N on it. The big N being Netscape Navigator. And he was actually paying for service. The college would not pay for the service because it was, what's this internet thing? So
It was just a fad, right?
Yeah, it was. So he actually paid for the only line that came into the college. And I'm like, what is this? And at that time, I wanted to be a computer science major. That was my major, computer science. And I quickly learned that I was no good at COBOL programming. So plans changed immediately. But sometimes we meet people and we're in places and experience things that was total, synchronicity or serendipity, and you have to take advantage of that. And some of those experiences, educational experiences at the high school, which was very meaningful for me, especially my junior and senior years. Sophomore, not so much so. But when you're an upperclassman, things change. Yeah. And you begin to see the end as opposed to the beginning. And that's a neat thing. And that's a neat thing that, for me, it's an honor to see Ethan about to get to that point, and proceed beyond that point, because after this summer, life looks a lot different. So.
Did you have any hobbies growing up, or did you play any sports?
Basketball at St. Paul, tennis. We played a lot of tennis in Cana, which sounds odd. Tennis is not known as a hotbed, yeah. But I had a really good friend that we played tennis. Also played tennis with my mother. She enjoyed. She was not someone that was a sports person, but I can remember going to the tennis courts in the summer and playing tennis, and that's something I haven't thought about and forever. I was a big Tom Clancy fan. If you've read any of those books.
I think I've read Hunt for the Red October.
Yes. That was my very first book, adult, big form book I actually read because of a computer game, The Hunt for Red October. It came with my computer game, inside the disc, inside the box. And I thought, what is this? The game was not great. But the book, that book started. Then I just went through every single Clancy book. And all of his associated authors. And then started on the Scott Fitzgerald row, then Hemingway, and it just kept reading and reading and reading, especially those authors from the 30s, 20s, 30s, and 40s.
So reading was a thing for you at a young age?
It was one of the few things, because I was an only child. My mother was an only child. My father was not. So, again, between basketball and reading, and a very solemn life in Cana where I grew up, there really wasn't much going on. Yeah. And those horizons, those experiences grew bigger, those opportunities grew bigger because of the high school and because of some teachers there, especially as a junior and a senior. I was yearbook editor in 9th grade at St. Paul. I was editor in 12th grade at the high school. Did MAC, social studies, with Judge Dalton and some other folks that still live in the area. So those are really, those academic experiences too many times we associate to an actual subject, or that high school experience, or the college experience. But so often those experiences relate directly back to the things we learn socially. Yeah. And those things those occasional gifts that we really don't appreciate until we look back and go, that really means something. It was a small thing at the time, but it really means something in retrospect.
Were there any other teachers that had meaningful impacts on you?
Oh, yes.
At the high school? At
the high school. Jane Mutsey taught English. Jane taught history. AP history. She passed away recently. She was also my second year MAC social studies coach. She was I think if anyone who has memories of Jane, there's always a smile and a sense of humor. but a sense of support. Ronnie mentioned Miss Oots for English, and his experience with Miss Oots was exactly mine. It was 100% mine. And as she was the first person that really encouraged me to write long form. And whether or not I was a good writer in high school, I'm not sure. Probably not. But she made me feel as if I was. And that's a true talent of a teacher, right? Because we have these questions, especially in modern times. What's the role of a teacher? To convey knowledge, content, or to provide other types of support, or all the above. Because there's this group that says content by itself, you don't need teachers. Right? You can just learn it from these machines. I would say that's false, because it's the teacher that translates the content in a way that you can make use of it. And that's what we're missing in modern education these days. We rely on the box and the content as opposed to the art of teaching. And teaching it's an art form. It's not something that's static and easy. You can find really good content people. You can find really good teachers. But the really special ones can teach their content.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part.
And it seems to be getting more and more like that, like what you said. We have a teacher up at the high school, Mr. Mitchell. He teaches chemistry. And his class is nothing like I've ever taken before. He really understands it because he did it. Yeah. So when he's teaching it, you're really seeing the way it really is in the field. So, I mean, he's like that. He's able to take the content but really make it applicable to what we're studying. So we have a few teachers like that up at the high school. But they're a rarity. They really are. And I'm not saying that most teachers aren't good, but the really, really good ones are the ones that are doing what you're saying.
It's hard. Even when I was at App State, an Appalachian produces hundreds of teachers per year. Your really good science and your math majors who were seniors or even juniors with the goal and intent of, and this happens at Radford too, with becoming teachers of math and science. Well, you have for-profit companies and major think tanks come in and go, you're really good at statistics or math. You know that teacher's salary you plan on making? We'll double that and pay your loans off. You just have to stay with us for 2 years. And so the new student is sitting there, I can be a teacher for X number of dollars. Or I can go, work in D.C. or some other location, or even from home and make 3 times more. So we're kind of culling out some of the best and the brightest. But we're culling out the best and the brightest from all our fields because there's fewer people, right? There's fewer people in the workforce. We have a population that's aging. We have a lack of respect for expertise and for formal education. So folks who have that art and science of knowledge and of deep subject matter expertise and can teach, that they're getting hard to come by, really hard, and that's unfortunate.
So after your time at Kerr County, where did you go?
My original plan was to go to, this is kind of ironic too, I found the irony of this. Computer science was that was really what I thought I wanted to do. But not necessarily computer programming, but back then you didn't have many choices. It was either networking or computer programming. There was one or the other, right? So I thought I was going to do the networking program at South Tech, which you will learn the irony of this later. Until I get my tuition bill for fall, and they're charging me out-of-state tuition. And I'm like, that's odd. I can't do that, right? Because I was a first-generation student, college student. Mom and Dad didn't go to college at that time. They did afterwards, after I did. And so I'm looking at this bill, like, that's not possible, right? Then at the same time, that was the summer, and Dad helped me buy a new Mustang 2 weeks before graduation. And I had that car for about 3 weeks, and I totaled it 3 weeks in, leaving a third shift job that I wasn't planning on staying there, but it was going to pay for the car, right? So after that accident, I remember sitting in the car waiting for the folks, the emergency medical folks, to cut me out of the car, literally.
Yeah.
Looking up, thinking, I don't think I want to go back to that plant. So one day was enough. And at the same time, I saw the letter for South Tech and so forth. Like, I can't do that. So I end up at the community college in Dobson, which was the natural thing to do because folks in Cana tend to travel more towards North Carolina than up towards Hillsville, right? It seems so far away. So I entered the computer programming program at the community college there. That lasted about 1 semester, but I stayed.
Yeah.
I figured out that programming was not for me, but I stayed. And a lot of students don't make a connection with their subject matter, and they leave. I made that faithful decision to stay as a college transfer student because I had no clue. I still have no clue. I just knew that I wanted to take some classes. Right? Then one day, my second semester, I was walking down the hallway and I saw this job board in the hallway. And there was this job posting that said, short-term job at the courthouse for 6 weeks, computer programming. I'm like, they can't have much computer programming there. Right? So I'm like, I can do that. So I walk in, and that kind of created this marble effect of why I'm sitting here today, that moment in time. And that little 6-week experience turned into 6 years where I was in that office. That 6-week experience that was supposed to be about computer programming allowed me to direct that office when I was 20 years old, still in college, which would never happen today. That experience gave me an opportunity to meet 3 people, that one person particularly that changed the trajectory of my experience forever, and 2 others that gave me some other gifts. One was Pete, who lives in Mount Airy, a 20-year banker who retired from First Union Bank, and he taught me what it meant to be a professional in the professional setting. That a suit and a tie is the expectation, even when it's not needed, and it's usually needed more when it's not needed, and just consistency. Then with my actual supervisor, who taught me, who's an English major, how to listen to people. She had and has one of the greatest gifts I've ever met in terms of relating to other people. Yeah. And that can be taught to a certain level, but part of that is just intuition and presence. So again, that 6 weeks turned into 6 years. They were not only those individuals I worked with, they were my family. They were truly my family during some very difficult times. And they still are my family. They will always be my family, just in a different type of way. So the impact, I'm a big fan of community colleges. As a student, as a faculty member, as an administrator, as a supporter, because they exist to serve the community. Yeah. And they meet the community wherever the community is. And sometimes things they're pointing and doing things. Sometimes you just have to be in the right place at the right time. And that small community college was. They connected me to a job in a hospital where I was billing insurance. I was terrified to pick up the phone, but I was calling people from 5 o'clock until 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, asking them to pay their hospital bills. They were in bad debt, meaning unpaid bills. And sometimes the other person on the phone who would pick up would say, yeah, that was my husband that passed away. I don't have any money. That would happen at least a couple of times a week. So then you hang up the phone and go, have to call the next person. And I hope the next person doesn't have the same experience, right? But I began to learn that sense of hesitancy was more about me and how I responded to the circumstance than what the other person brought me. My response was much more important, especially if I wanted to honor the person on the other side of the phone. And I was just asking them to pay their bill, right? So from Surrey Community, Bluefield College, at that time, there were like 0 programs you could complete online. 0. Many times you would do mail order, video cassettes, those type things.
Lonnie mentioned, kind of.
Yes. Except Bluefield, and Bluefield was one of the colleges actually looked at high school. Bluefield seemed interesting to me, and it seemed like a college I could actually go to after high school. But I kind of put it out of my head for a variety of reasons. That and Lee's McRae was another one in Banner Elk. Yeah. Ethan knows my fixation with small liberal arts colleges. And they were like my thing. So I saw this ad in the newspaper, Bluefield College, creating this educational bachelor's degree program to be delivered in Hillsville, of all places. Yeah. I'm like, that can't be right. So I go to the organizing meeting in Radford, and it was true. So in 1997, in November of 1997, we started. It was a 18-month accelerated program. We met on Tuesday nights, only Tuesday nights, at the Southwest Virginia Training Center in Woodlawn. Mm-hmm. Tuesday nights.
Interesting.
Yes. And there was actually 2 cohorts that started. One cohort started in Carroll, and we had a great faculty member that stayed with us. He taught all the classes but 2, which was odd too, but we're so glad he did. We didn't lose anyone in our cohort. Yeah. We started with 10 people. We actually gained 2 people. Why did we gain 2 people? The Radford cohort lost over 12 people and only had 2 people left. Yeah. So we felt, as students, we felt pretty lucky. Mm-hmm. And everybody in that room was state employees or highway patrolmen, or they were all adults. Yeah. I was the youngest person in the room. And technically you had to be over 21 to actually even have a chance to do it. I was barely over 21. So in 1999, my cohort graduated May 1st of 1999, 18 months. Sharon, Ethan's mom, and I got married May 2nd of 1999, which is a unique piece of trivia. And that was somewhat intentional as well. So Bluefield has a really neat place in my existence, not only for my own experience, but I've had dozens of students attend that institution that really didn't see themselves as college material, or they didn't want to have a really big university experience. Mm-hmm. And that institution does a really good job for this region at what it does. And it doesn't try to be something it's not. And many institutions try to be something it's not. And that provides a really poor experience for the student. Yeah.
Did you work at the courthouse all through that time as well?
I did.
Where did you go after the courthouse and after Bluefield? Did you continue your education?
Yeah. So in terms of employment, I returned back to Surrey Community College and spent 4 years back at SEC leading a federal, it's called a Title IV grant. Federal funding is divided up into titles frequently, categories. And these categories, this category was Title IV. And God kind of was playing has a sense of humor. So I became responsible for this program in 6 counties. I was director, its purpose was to provide educational opportunities to first-generation college students. Our job was to recruit students, not only for Surrey Community, but for Forsyth Tech, for Davie Community College. So my counties were Surrey, Stokes, Rockingham, Davie, Yadkin, and Forsyth County. So we recruited 1,000 students a year. During that period of time, early 2000s, especially in that region, significant layoffs were occurring in furniture factories and textile mills, and I think we lost about 30,000 jobs in the region during about 7 years. I would have been one of those people if that moment in time had not changed. I could have easily been one of those folks working in those facilities, in those mills. As it happened to me, myself and another one of my friends that worked for the college, we were the first people in the plant for all these plants when they were informed that they were losing their job. So many individuals I saw multiple times, 3 times, because they would move from one place of employment to another and they would lose their job. And I actually was there for the meeting for my father when he lost his. I don't even know your mom knows that. I don't talk about that one very much. That was a hard one. So I did that for 4 years at Surrey Community. That was, our budget then was, with other federal funding, I was responsible for $1.5 million maybe for 6 counties, and we had a staff of 30 people maybe. At that same time, I was, to make things occur in sequence, I started at UNCG in graduate school in liberal arts. I had a great class about systems change, how societies change at the system level. It was a wonderful class. It was great. The books are still here. I still look at them. I still refer folks to these systems books. But I really wanted to go to Wake Forest. I really wanted to go to Wake. And they had a similar program. And I had some friends that kind of worked with, that we went to the Surrey Community together. They were in this liberal arts program, liberal studies program at Wake Forest. And I started talking to them, and I'm like, I'll just apply and see what happens. And I still have the coffee mug that I got that day somewhere here. This is, I mean, literally, there's a coffee mug that the program director gave me. And she said, I think you'll be a good fit. We'll save you a slot. I'm like, okay. I wasn't sure what that meant. And I did not understand that it's much harder to get out than get in. In my case, it was easy to get in. But for me, it was harder to get out. Right? And I mean that in terms of successfully finishing. The neat thing about the liberal studies program there, which is still there, is you could design your curriculum. And I just wanted the experience. I wanted that graduate degree from that institution. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Had no clue. I still don't. Again, I've said that for the second time. So the neat thing about that particular program is you could take classes out of different departments. They told you what the 9 credits you had to take. The rest was up to you. Then you had a choice at the end to do a project or a thesis. I chose the thesis on purpose because I think every graduate student should write a thesis. Every single one. You have to have the experience of writing. So I was able to take classes in the religion department, in the humanities department, in the art department, in the Japanese language department, which I've told Ethan about, which was the only class I actually dropped at the college level was Japanese English. Literature is Japanese literature. And again, the books are on the shelf. But the material was so dense that there was just, I don't know, I've never had such difficulty with that piece. So graduated from Wake Forest in 2005. I was still at Surrey Community. Oddly, during that period of time, I was also taking classes at App State in their graduate program at the same time, kind of going back and forth. And I was doing that intentionally because I knew I wanted to teach at the college level. And I knew the degree at Wake Forest would get me in the door. But there are some obscure credentialing requirements at the college level that the federal government and the accrediting bodies have. They say you have to have at least 18 hours, graduate hours, in the subject you teach. So it's not good enough to have a graduate degree. You have to have specific content in your field. So I was working on both at the same time. So I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach, and I knew I wanted to teach sociology and counseling. I didn't know how all this was going to work out, and I knew that I took the long way around this because nothing was connected. But eventually, I had confidence the package would come together. Where the package started coming together for counseling human services in 2007. When Forsyth Tech offered me a teaching job, teaching counseling and substance abuse. I was there for 1 year. One of my dear friends that, again, still connected with, leaves to teach at Winston-Salem State. She's now a Dean of Education at App State. This is a really small world. I mean, this is really a small world. But Sean leaves and says, the program's yours if you want it. And it was struggling. So before I left, we had over 300 students in that program. Yeah. We were the third biggest program in the state for what we taught. And Sean gave me a great lesson my first day, because I had been teaching for Wilkes Community College, business and criminal justice for 8 years. Yeah, I would actually go to Boone, take classes, stop in Wilkesboro, teach. I would go to the courthouse and work until 2, drive to Boone, take a class, teach my Wilkes class at 6, get home at 10, do the same thing the next day. Wow. Yeah. So some semesters at Wilkes I taught for Wilkes for over 12 years. I taught 12 classes, or 12 credits, 4 classes. That's full time for some faculty. But Sean told me at Forsyth, the hardest thing that you can teach students, any guesses? What's the hardest thing to teach students?
To read.
Time management.
To listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Her words were, that you will have the biggest struggle. And I'm like, no, everybody listens. Yeah. Then near the end of the first semester, holiday break, I go back to her office and say, yeah, I think you were right. Because I taught my first interviewing class. And no one really listens, do they? No, they don't. So I finished those. Actually have a postmaster's certificate in counseling from App State. Then I stayed at App and took another 21 hours in sociology, intentionally, because I wanted to be able to teach sociology. And I ended up with an odd focus because I was in the substance abuse program at App. And my mentor at App was a Native American who has moved back Midwest now, who taught me humility and an appreciation for culture. So I did for South Tech, because I grew up in Cana. I mean, our high school, I think we had one minority at Carroll County High School when I was a senior, one. And the things that Wake taught me a different level of being. App taught me that I could be good at something. For South Tech taught me an appreciation for culture. My mentor in the counseling program taught me how to be with people again. Then in sociology, I merged this interest with older adults, have a certificate in gerontology, which is the study of older adults. So merged this idea of individuals who have addictions, substance use addictions, who are older adults, which at the time was kind of a leading edge idea. It's becoming, the time has come finally 20 years later. So when I was teaching it for South Tech, I taught there until 2011. I also worked just a tad in an inpatient facility for older adults who were experiencing substance use problems, over 55, alcohol, prescription drugs. And we were only one of two facilities in the entire nation. That facility only stayed open about 6 months because it was ahead of its time. So there you have that sociology piece. Well, another little interesting fact, which was an accident I didn't realize was happening at the time, all the credit I achieved at Wake counted as humanities credits, which allowed me to teach humanities at the college level. And that didn't click with me until later at Forsyth Tech, when I was asked to teach again, I taught human services and counseling, supervised students in the field primarily. The chairperson for humanities said, "You're one of those humanities liberal arts people from Wake, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, I need you to teach this technology and society class." I'm like, okay, I don't know if I'm qualified. Well, it's humanities. So the accrediting body, the feds, think you're qualified, so will you teach it? "Where's it at in King?" "It's on my way home." "Yeah, I'll teach it." Yeah, right. So that's this little nexus of Dobson to Winston-Salem to Wake to Boone. It was real. It was real for me. It was truly real. Then I ended up getting a governor's scholarship. This was a total accident. One of my best friends received this scholarship. He was teaching at Pulaski County High School for his master's degree, and it was an educational master's of education in instructional design and technology. Basically, how do you design learning opportunities for students? I just apply. I thought it was kind of neat. I mean, computers, education, internet. It sounds fun. For some reason, they let me in. And it's a full ride. I'm like, I don't need to do this, but it's kind of neat, right? And it was online, and that was the first time I really did something online. Before that, it was always face-to-face. And that program kind of showed me what my students experienced who were on the other end, taking online programs. And that experience led me to teach at Radford in the education department, teaching future teachers. Once again, the future teacher thing came up with a faculty member who teaches alternative theories of education, which we won't get into.
So what years did you teach up at Radford?
Just for 1 year. Yep. And when all that was happening, I returned. I was kind of recruited, which is one of those pivotal points of decision making that each of you will receive or go through as you get older. That you're sitting here with a decision. Both decisions are really positive. And no decision is wrong, but you know that it has life-changing implications. So in 2011, Frithville Community College recruited me. They were building a human services program that I was teaching at. So some of those years I was teaching at Forsyth, at Wilkes, and at Frithville all at the same time, especially when Ethan was young. And the pay scale in Virginia is much greater than North Carolina. I mean, significantly greater. So I saw the significantly greater bottom line with a brand new program and thought, I should go. It'll be closer to home. The only thing that was holding me back was at my current pace, I could have retired in North Carolina at the age of 50. 50. I'm 47 now. That was a pivotal decision. Short term, it made sense.
Yeah.
The bottom line made sense. All the associated benefits and freedom, and it all made sense. But that was my path kind of took a left there, and everything changed. Some for the good, and some for the bad. And sometimes those paths you can't anticipate. They just happen.
So you talked about your writing. Did you continue to write throughout your adult life?
Up through Wake Forest. Wake made me, I think, a really good writer. You have to remember those faculty members. My thesis chair, who's sadly no longer living, was one of the leading research scientists related to Anglo-American relations. His writing skills were, he was a Rhodes Scholar. He went to Oxford. You felt as if when you received your feedback that, I'm not sure I speak English, right? Because it was all read, right? But he had a way of using that as encouragement and not to discourage you. And he brought me back to those things that Miss Oots taught me in high school and my freshman English teacher taught me in Dobson. Keep things as simple as possible, as few words as possible. Be direct and maybe be happy with that. But after my thesis, that thesis project took six months. And I think at that time I was writing, in terms of words on paper, the best I ever have. But after that, my writing became more technical in nature because it had to be. During that period of time afterwards, we were pretty successful at grant writing and during community-based research. And the writing you have to do for the federal government and for funders, it's very technical. Yeah. And it's not like sitting in a library for hours upon hours and writing 2 paragraphs and leaving and feeling as if you had a good day, right? You have to write 10 pages today because the deadline is, for example, I've spent the past 3 weeks on 3 grants. And the goal is to get them done, get them funded, and move on. Yeah. That is the goal. The goal is not to pull the thesis off the bookshelf 20 years from now and read it. Right? It is not the goal to go to Z. Smith Reynolds Library on campus to find your thesis and read it. You know, what I've wrote the past 3 weeks, nobody will ever read after the funders read it. It's just, it's not real. Yeah. You just do it because it has to be done. And I think my brain kind of turned off when I realized you just do it when it has to be done. So it's also a skill that you quickly, writing for me, it is a skill that if you don't practice that skill and cultivate it, it's hard to build that momentum back, especially as one ages, because your attention span changes and other things become more important, and conversations like this become more important, as opposed to spending 6 months writing 150 pages. Yeah. Right. Other priorities take place.
So you mentioned you started teaching at Withville in 2011.
Yep.
How long did you stay at Withville? And did you teach anywhere else after that?
Yes. So there was a time between Forsyth Tech and Withville. I taught at Lindsey Wilson College. I still teach for Lindsey Wilson. At that time, we met on Friday nights and Saturdays in Whitfield.
Yeah.
Adults. We don't meet anymore face to face, but it's totally 100% online. So I've taught for Lindsay for over 10 years. Again, research methods or gerontology, study of older adults, substance use, counseling, cultural diversity. Again, those human services topics. The best teaching experiences as a faculty member I've ever had was at Whitfield, without a doubt, in many ways, as a faculty member. From 2011 until about 2013, I was taught sociology, humanities, human services at Whitfield. Then here's another piece of irony. This is a funny piece of irony. The dean that recruited me to come to Whitfield, I got to know at Bluefield College. He was one of the teachers in our cohorts.
Oh, I see.
Yes, and he also, at that time, he worked at New River, but he came to Whitfield as dean. So I'm like, I know Bruce. All these dots are connecting, right? So he leads my interview process and my panel and that type of thing. And then he lets me know, like 5 days before I'm supposed to go to campus, I'm headed back to the classroom. I'm not dean anymore. And I'm like, I'm just getting here. I don't know. I mean, I know you. I don't know anyone else. But thankfully, the dean that took his place was a very good dean, an advocate for faculty. And she stayed for about 2 years, which is very common. The average lifespan of an academic dean in the VCCS system is a little bit more than 3 years, almost 4 years. It also cost $1 million to prepare a dean. If you do the math there, if the average lifespan is less than 4 years, and it costs about $1 million to get the person there, you have a retention issue. Yeah. You have a mathematical issue there. So Donna stayed for about 2 years. And I was in a meeting. I was actually on the interview committee before she left, a various interview committee. And at that time, our college was going through a major transition. A new president, an interim vice president, all of the deans had left. And I was sitting there and I told our vice president, if you need me to fill in, I'll fill in for a couple of weeks until we find someone to take Donna's place. And, well, that was a good experience. I'm glad I did that. That was a very positive decision. So I served as interim dean of transfer programs, which is all of your math, science, humanities, those type of things, for 5 months. And I was ready to go back to the classroom, except the dean of health programs, nursing, dental hygiene, and so forth, was appointed vice president. And her request was I stay as interim dean. But I just moved across the hallway to health sciences because we had recruited another dean from Norfolk State to come from Tidewater area. So I'm like, okay, that was probably a mistake. In terms of those pivotal moments, that was a mistake. I should have returned to the classroom. Everything was in place for me to go back. And there would have been no harm, no foul. It would have been okay. But I said yes. And I actually enjoyed health sciences more than liberal arts. Now you would think because of my liberal arts background, that might be a better fit. But because of my experience in the hospital setting and with counseling and health programs and gerontology, I kind of felt like I fit. Yeah. And our faculty we were very functional. And I inherited a very good department because of our vice president. And I served as interim for a year. Then they posted a job because you have to post the job publicly. And anyone internally has to go through the whole thing like an external candidate. So you have to do the campus presentation, the interview panel was 12 people, the interview with the president and all that. And I'm sitting there knowing deep down, I don't need to do this. And Ethan's mom even said, you're not going to be happy. And I should have listened. And she was right. So I made permanent dean. And again, I was pretty young then. I was in 39, 40. That's pretty unusual. But I knew I didn't fit when folks would ask me, did you always want to be a dean? And I would never say no. And there was a moment on a Monday morning that I'll go to the office and I see this long row of students down the hallway, single file, waiting to get in my office because I knew they were nursing students. I'm like, they're here to see me, not the other dean. And I spent my morning talking to each student. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is the last thing I want to do, is talk to these students. I want to be in the classroom and not dealing with this administrative issue about a policy complaint that I actually passed the policy for and approved, which was the right policy to make a decision. But I'm like, this is not what needs to be. Somebody else can do this better. And I told myself when I accepted the job permanently, when I stopped having the ability to take care of my students, and my faculty especially, I don't need to be here. Because I believe in this approach with folks I supervise. If I take care of you, you will take care of those we serve. But if I can't take care of you, you're not taking care of my students. And faculty were saying that's not true. But deep down I felt it was. Because a month after I accepted the job permanently, that's when my father was a victim of a drink driving accident. He died instantly, and his aunt died, or his sister, my aunt, died 2 weeks later. And if you're looking at points in the road, leaving Forsyth was a point in the road to come back to Virginia. Another point in the road was saying, yes, I'll accept the health sciences job, when I knew deep down it wasn't. Then there was another point in the road where I'm not healthy enough to take care of me, but I'm certainly not healthy enough to take care of my faculty. Because I was responsible for 45 faculty and 500 students. So that math just wasn't adding up. So you reach those points sometimes in life when I worked literally from 2000 until 2013 to sit in that chair. Then one Saturday morning I decided I'm not going to do that anymore. And there was a bit of grieving there, and I still grieve for that, because that moment in time, it was the right decision to make to say I'm leaving. But that was also 13, 14 years that was my sense of self, my being. And I had to give that up as well, in order to save everything else. And so as we grow older as adults, those points in the road kind of just happen. And I had a dear friend in Winston-Salem that I did some contract work for when Ethan was small, that is on the wall there. And I just kind of start putting out fillers that I just want to do something different. Yeah. I talked to her on Friday. Saturday morning she calls and offers me a job as director of training for the entire state of North Carolina for prevention. Basically, they want me to build an online training system for 400 professionals. I can do that. That's what I did always. Well, I do prevention, I teach, I can build online systems. Did that for 3 years, led that program. So we served 23 agencies and 400 people a year. but there was a significant amount of travel. Um, and I was kind of going backward, because when you get old, you start thinking about retirement, right?
Yeah.
Remember the 50 thing? Well, I have 6 years in Virginia that's still here. So that wasn't lost. But the 3 years I spent with a nonprofit in Winston-Salem, I was stuck. It wasn't counting towards anything, right? So that brings me back to what Ethan mentioned earlier, this prevention thing, which has been part of my being for a long time. The irony of God has a sense of humor. And I can only say this because it's been so long. That my original foray into prevention, and what we mean by prevention is, can we reduce the effect of something or delay it? Reduce or delay, especially in folks your age. My first project was drink driving prevention. And I spent 5 years on that in Surrey and Stokes counties when I was teaching it for South Tech. So I would teach in the day until 1 o'clock, then do the grant stuff in the afternoons. Then I would come home and teach for all the other institutions. And so I thought I knew everything about drink driving in 2 counties, because I did. I could tell you what roads, Thursday afternoons, October, November, 2-lane road, where to drive, who the candidates might be, who might be driving drunk, and what the characteristics were, and the data all behind it. We didn't look at the impact of that crime and that activity on the victims, though. So I thought I knew everything. I didn't know anything, because of the experience that just this stranger that was driving drunk in Winston-Salem, and my father and his sister was in the wrong place at the wrong time, literally, waiting for the stoplight to turn from red to green. Again, it's a moment in time. So that moment in time not only impacted, I said in court, when I testified in court, that myself and this offender were connected in time forever by this moment, by the strangeness of the moment. We don't know each other, but we're more connected than I may be to anyone else. And I haven't talked with him since. So it's just an example of moments in time that sometimes you have to look back and realize those moments in time you recover, and recovery sometimes comes in odd ways. So part of my recovery was to let go of something I've worked for 13 years and just do what I do well for 3 years and kind of disappear and just be. And I was just being. Then I had another chance to come back to Surrey for local government and do prevention and research and planning. And I'm really good at seeing connections in systems, seeing how this part works with this part and how it fits together, and how to prove it fits together, and how to prove the outcomes to that. I'm much better at that than the therapeutic piece, which may be interesting or may not to you. But there's very few folks that I've met. I don't say I'm really good at much stuff. I was really good at teaching, and I'm really good at seeing patterns in society. That's makes me happy. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're working in North Carolina again, right? After you left NCTTA, which was, is that the correct?
It is.
Yeah, the nonprofit.
Yeah.
You're working in the same courthouse that you
Started in.
Yeah.
That is another point of irony.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the original job, in the 90s was upstairs on the 3rd floor. Now we're in the basement. So the joke is, I'm one of those few people I've been at the very top, and I've been buried too. Right? I mean, but it is the same building, and I found some comfort in that. Also found some that kind of bothered me too. I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit that process, and I'm not sure honestly how long that process will continue. But again, I was in the right place at the right time with the right people, and it's given me a chance to do what I really enjoy. Yeah.
So how long have you been working for the Dobson government?
25, 26 months.
26 months, yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about making these human connections with people in these interviews. Do you have any advice on how to really sit down and talk to a person?
That's really hard. You would have thought that my clinical education would have taught me how to do that. It did not. I've had 4 years of supervision where someone more experienced and with greater qualifications than me has supervised my work. And that's really, really helped, having that feedback, live feedback. But what really helped me was an accident. When I was at TTA, the statewide training, one of the projects I wanted us to implement was coaching. Coaching professionals and other employees to improve their performance, to improve their level of support that they feel in their organization, and to teach them skills. Because the idea is, just because we teach you a skill or give you an educational component doesn't mean that you do anything with it. Generally, the student doesn't, unless you actually practice it and receive feedback, and you can see the fruits of your labor. So if you just learn something, it tends to dissipate pretty fast. But if you learn it, and then you do it, and then you have feedback from someone who is a content matter expert and knows how to give the feedback, the chances of you actually implementing those things is much greater. So we were doing a pretty good job of the content piece. But I wasn't real happy with how we were supporting individuals implementing those skills. So coaching has become real popular in the professional world. And I started looking at coaching programs. And I'm like, wow, it takes a long time to actually learn how to be a professional coach. And wow, it is expensive. I mean, like super expensive for a high quality program. So I started narrowing down the list to two. A program that was based off of a model, I think it was at Harvard, and a program that was based off a collection of research in Portland, Oregon. I chose Portland because it was the opposite of anything I thought I had ever experienced. Their focus was not necessarily on the cognitive piece of coaching or talking to people, but Fiosha's program is on how you listen and have conversations with the body and not words. It's called semantic processing. I also didn't realize the level of depth and the level of intensity that 18-month journey brought forth in terms of intensive coaching from her staff to me, practice I had to do, multiple testing, coaching folks in front of others, all those things that you would have thought graduate school would have taught us. It really doesn't. And when folks say, how did you learn how to relate to other people? Well, in the 90s, when I was at the courthouse, and my coaching program, they teach you how to do that in the counseling program? Yeah, but no. So points of advice, I don't know. Be comfortable with who you happen to be. Have a presence. It's a way of being. Be with the person. My favorite therapist, Carl Rogers, C-A-R-L, Rogers. He practiced in the 40s and 50s and 60s. He was the first therapist that actually recorded his sessions, audio tape first, videotape later, and used them with his students. he kind of coined a way of being. Just be. In more modern terms, a more simple way to talk about it is, if you're thinking about your response, you're not listening. If you're thinking about what you want to say next, you're not listening. If you're afraid of silence, you're not listening. And so much of that is the energy we give off too in the room. In some of the work I do with others in my research is well established. If you believe the research that I do, your body gives off a certain level of energy, and you can be impacted by that energy level within 3 feet by your heart frequency. So if you're sitting with someone who's really, really nervous, or has a lot of emotional processes going on, and you can't moderate yourself, then you may be impacted by that frequency.
Really?
Yes, especially if you're 3 feet within someone's space. That's why sometimes you may meet individuals and you're close to them, and you just feel at ease with them, and you can't explain why. You just don't know, or you're around somebody and something just happens. It's kind of like with a dog. The same research has been done with animals. The animals have this sense of lowering stress levels in the body. So I would say practice that sometime. Find someone that you don't necessarily feel comfortable around, and get within 3 feet in a natural setting and just observe yourself. Or observe yourself for those individuals that tend to have a calming presence. There's certain individuals that I know in advance I'm going to sit as far as I can away from the person, because my presence doesn't match theirs. No matter what happens, there's this vibration happening. So listening is just not the ears and the words, but it's primarily the body. Can you listen with the body? Can you listen to actually be in the space? Can you listen without any preconceived ideas? Do you trust yourself enough to listen with intent that you will naturally know what to say when the time is right? And not be afraid of silence. Statistically, about 3 seconds of silence is great. When you get to about 8 seconds, the other person gets nervous. Usually 3 seconds is your magic count. 1, 2, 3. Less than 3, the person thinks you're not listening to them. More than about 5, they think, they must think I'm crazy. Listening is so hard. It's hard. In coaching, listening is hard. And providing feedback that makes it appear as if you're listening and you're not parroting back what you're supposed to say. The goal is to drive the conversation forward, drive it to the future, keep driving it into the future.
Lex Fridman did an interview with an FBI hostage negotiator recently, and near the end of the episode they talked about mirroring and repeating back what the person you're talking to has said, like the last few words.
Yeah.
Do you think that's driving the conversation forward, or do you think it's giving a false sense of listening, I guess?
Yes and no. In my world, it's called paraphrasing. So that's a double-edged sword. If you do the mirroring or the paraphrasing without skill, you do more harm than good. In this particular interview you mentioned, he obviously has a level of skill that it's just natural, as opposed to being forced. In my world, we talk about motivational interviewing, which is a process of having conversations with others and listening. It's actually the next layer of Rogerian thought, or the way of being. Carl Rogers. It's adding more processes to the skill in a modern way. But that approach is an art and a science. So if you don't know how to be with a person in that space with them, it doesn't matter what else you do, right? I've supervised counselors and staff from a variety of schools and schools of thought and experience levels, and I've seen them sit down in front of people, and they were afraid of the person they sit down in front of. And they know all the stuff on the books, right? But they can't have a conversation with the person. And after the client leaves, it's like, well, tell me about that. I didn't know what to say. Well, that was obvious. Or usually the opposite thing happens. You say too much.
Yeah.
And there's usually, this is a really bad example, and you guys have entertained me here, but usually with someone of advanced skill, you start seeing in a 60-minute conversation, the person conducting the interview is talking about 20% of the time. And their words are very brief, pushing it along. And the other person's spending 80-90% of the time talking. And when you have a conversation happening like that, you know it's a good conversation. Yeah, you just know it.
There's a reason we're interviewing you and you're not interviewing us. We want to hear from you and...
Well, that could be a good thing or a bad thing.
So you talked about that energy between people. Is there any research that people can read?
Yes.
Books
Some of the leading research is called heart math, HEARTMATH. I'm actually a heart math facilitator. And I actually have a piece of technology you can clip to your ear, and it helps teach people to calm their nervous system, with the idea that if you can teach some of these skills before the point of crisis occurs, you can better regulate yourself when it does. So if you practice these skills for about 3 months in terms of self-regulation, when the point of crisis occurs, then you will have kind of reset your thinking and your habits, and you're better prepared to acknowledge the crisis. That doesn't mean it'll overcome or make things better. It's a coping mechanism. And all that, I was led to that because of the coaching program in Portland. My hunch paid off because I wanted to be exposed to a whole different way of being, because I was taught in graduate school and by North Carolina to be a good cognitive behavioralist, especially in working with others, which means what you think, you have a problem, what you think about the problem impacts your feelings. What your thoughts and feelings does impacts your choices. And if you can learn how to control your thoughts and feelings, then you can better impact the outcome. Well, I kind of believe that until I went and saw a psychiatrist after Dad died. And he tried this cognitive behavioral crap on me. And I'm sitting there thinking, I know this better than you do. I've done this for 15 years, and it's not working. And if this was going to work, I would have already achieved it. So between the cognitive behavioralism and the medication that I never took, it was kind of like, I've kind of been saying the same things to my clients the past 15 years. And we've been leaving out everything but the top up. We were not addressing. The conversations never occurred for the neck down. And Fiosha kind of gave me the permission who leads that program, to think about things from, yes, this is really important, but the entire body is really, really important. So managing cognitive thoughts is important. But managing cognitive thinking and processes and behavior and nothing else is effective for some folks. It certainly was not effective for me.
So when you're doing interviews, what's the line? Is there like a special point between pragmatic and emotional that you can kind of hit? Is there a sweet spot?
Yeah, being professional, but also making a connection with the person you're interviewing.
That's a really interesting question. Have a colleague and I that presented to about 300 people 2 weeks ago on this exact topic. And we felt as if we were the only people in the room.
It's generally bad, isn't it?
And that was interesting because our topic was about connecting with people. And we were saying that the individuals and families sitting before us was the most important thing. And we don't need to know everything. And we need to take what they give us. Instead of what we've been taught to do is, hello, Luke. We have 65 minutes. I have 116 questions to ask you. And I'm going to do that on my computer. And after that, we're going to come up with a number, which is a diagnostic code, which is going to make your insurance company happy and let me get paid. And everything's going to be great. And I haven't learned a thing about you. I know less about you than when you walked in, even though I asked you 116 questions. I don't know what's important to you. We just focused on all the problems as opposed to what's important to you. So there's a lot of criticism for, it's a lot easier to say, hey, Luke, I'm Jamie. I'm XYZ. And I'm pretending to be a blank slate, which is what I was taught to be in graduate school, and have no emotional response. That's not being taught these days. Some emotional response is being taught is appropriate in a interview type setting, a clinical setting, but it's still the norm. When someone says something that's kind of emotionally full of emotion, I'll be the first person to say, that sounds like crap, as opposed to no response at all. Because sometimes it is crap. And there's a fine line there. My level of confidence and ability to manage circumstances, I think it's different than those I supervise who are brand new counselors. I do supervise brand new counselors. And I take risks that I would never ask them to take, right? And there's some risks I would never take that some of those folks, my mentors I've had, would take. So you kind of develop your own style, and you kind of figure out on the fly, and you hope you do, we call it boundaries, is what we call it. How do you keep your boundaries? It's hard.
To bring up one more thing about the energy between people, if you sense like a negative energy, how do you know if it's you or that person that's putting out that energy?
That's real hard. That you have to do your own work in advance. And you have to be somewhat of an island in the storm before that happens. And if you try to do this work without being the island in the storm, then you could do harm to others. And that's my current focus of, my real focus. Because we're creating a system, in North Carolina at least, that could potentially do significant harm to the most vulnerable. Because of how we're structuring some professional activities. And I see some of those individuals who are involved in that work. They're not an island yet. They're still suffering from their own waves. I intentionally did not see a client for 5 years. I wasn't healthy enough. And I told myself, if I'm not healthy enough to take care of my faculty, I'm certainly not healthy enough to work with another person about all the stuff in their closet. So for me, it was 5 years to get there. But those 5 years reminded me, even at a greater level, how to be the island in the storm. So if you're sitting with another person in a conversation like this, or a more formal conversation, or even at the lunch table, and you will know before anyone else internally what is happening. And like Grandma said, if you feel it not in your stomach, it's probably a sign you should listen to. But there's also another lesson in that. You will feel that first. Then guess who's going to feel it before you can make sense of it? It's the other person. They will pick up on it first. And you will think that everything's fine. But they're going to pick up on it first. They will pick up on the energy first. Even if they don't know anything about energy work, they'll pick up on it.
Yeah.
They won't know what it is, but they will pick up on it. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. The Green Berets is trained in this work. Lots of special forces, Navy SEALs. The research is fascinating.
Yeah.
So beforehand, you sent me a list of topics that you maybe wanted to cover.
I think I had one more question before we
Okay.
hit that list. I'm really proud of where we're from, Appalachia. The culture of I'm proud from where we're from, like I said. But I see a lot of books on Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
What's special about the place to you, and how is prevention unique in the Appalachian area?
Wow, what a great question. All those books came to be because through another acquaintance, when I was at Radford, I got to know the Appalachian Studies director for the App Studies program at Radford, though. So I took a couple of classes, and I thought I knew my experience of Appalachia, right? That mountain range from Alabama to New York, but really centering on West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, in Virginia. We're so unique, but we're not. And that's a contradiction in terms. We're very place-based. What that means is, and it makes sense when you think about it, that especially in the smaller parts of Appalachia that's not urbanized, folks tend not to move around. They tend to stay close to where they grew up, right? They're attached to the land. Now, that kind of makes sense historically because social mobility was not as great as it was. And for those of us who live in Appalachia during times of economic distress, where did people go to work? Ohio and Chicago, but they tended to come back home. So we think we're unique. We're not so much so. We're very place-based. We're not so much so. We don't believe that we have great diversity, but we do. We have great diversity in terms of ethnicity, but Alabama, Appalachia is much different than West Virginia, Appalachia. Virginia, bordering Kentucky, is much different than here. It's the same state. I had this wild idea of merging addiction issues with individuals in Appalachia. And I came up with that idea because I spent one summer when I was teaching. I always tried to work when I was teaching for another inpatient facility in Galax. And we saw lots of outsiders come and fly in for treatment. But there was a few folks from Appalachia coming. And I thought, this is odd. We have this facility of 100 people and maybe 10s from this region, and everyone else is from somewhere else. And these 10 folks just seem out of place. But we happen to be in Galax, Virginia, and these natives seem out of place. Why is that? Are we really that different? I've taught Appalachian Studies as well. I think we're different, but not the ways that we think we are.
Yeah.
Some of those differences are self-imposed. And some of those differences are because of a lack of equity in our society. Have you heard those terms? There's a difference between equal and equity. equality and equity. Yeah, yeah. If I had been treated equally, I would not be sitting here today. So anyone that says everyone should be treated equally, no. I'm from Appalachia, first generation college student, low income, growing up in the poorest part of the county, one of the poorest parts of this state. If I had been treated equally, what would that mean? I would still be there. But for some reason, I met individuals and systems that was willing to treat me in an equitable way, that gave me an opportunity, just like everyone else. Wake Forest gave me the opportunity too. They didn't care that I went to a small, rural high school. One of my best friends, her heart was set on UVA, graduated from high school. Valedictorian of her class, goes to the interview, is told, we don't take people like you here. And everybody's supposed to be equal. People like you is people southwest of Roanoke in a small high school. That's people like you. So I have very little patience for when we have arguments that discourage conversations of diversity, discourage inclusion and equity. Well, that's kind of short-sighted, especially for a community like this that's 95% majority. This community hasn't been treated equally in forever. We didn't have electricity till the 50s. Your school system invests among the lowest amount of taxpayer funds compared to other parts of the state. There's Southwest Virginia, there's Central Virginia, there's Tidewater, and there's Nova. You can't tell me that you have the same opportunities as a student in Fairfax County. You can't say that. Just like we know based on zip code, we can predict within a pretty good level of accuracy when we will die because of your income level, because of your health status, and your educational level by zip code. So a Fairfax County zip code that is the second highest income in the entire nation, of course, you'll live longer. Of course you will. Because you have 500 specialists for diabetes. We have 2. So I challenge, frequently in Appalachia we want to believe that you can pull yourself up by the bootstraps and everybody's equal. And if you work hard enough, you will be given what you need. I'm not sure that ever existed. And when we say that, we're taking away what makes us unique. And we're not creating a conversation with others and embracing the diversity we do have, that we have a lot of diversity here. It just looks different, right? But we're not willing to accept that either. We don't want to accept diversity at large. And when I say we, it's just not local geography here. It's Appalachia at large. But it's just not Appalachia now. It's national. Yeah. I mean, it's national. I shouldn't be having conversations with anyone like I have to have about major decisions that impacts hundreds and thousands of people, that we don't like those terms, diversity and equity and inclusion. We just want everybody to be treated equal. Okay, you're 65 years old, white male, retired, making decisions for other people. What gives you the right to make a decision for a 25-year-old? They grew up in a different world. That's not inclusionary. You're excluding. You're not representing your voters. You're doing the opposite. So I don't think that answers your question. I was on a tirade, cut it out. But it's. I mean, you can look at the books. Redneck Manifesto. Yeah, it is what it is, right? How people perceive us, or just some of those classic tropes. There's a great YouTube podcaster, Real Appalachia, REAL. If you haven't watched that, they basically spend every week they travel somewhere and do a driving history of these towns. And it's where I call home. I can't perceive myself living anywhere else. Am I the 100% typical person? No. I'm probably one of the most liberal people that live in this county, that's attended some of the most liberal institutions, one of the most liberal institutions in the Southeast. But I still feel welcome here. I still feel as if this is home. Everybody can't say that. And I also value that Appalachian culture is what made me into part of who I am. And it's made each of you into part of who you are. And I see nothing but a strength there. That's not a liability. It's a strength. And if someone says from a university setting, we don't take people like you, it's like, I don't take people like you, is the answer. Because that's not what the university is designed to be.
Do you think there is a certain idea people perceive when they hear the accent?
Oh, yes.
Because, I never really noticed until we really started recording the podcast, and I said, it sounds like they just pulled me off the mountain. You really hear it when you hear it from like a third person setting. You really hear the accent. Do you think that really affects opportunities for people?
It does, without fail. Maybe not within Appalachia itself. Sometimes you have the opposite, right? I interviewed a young man last night from Maine. So I'm sitting there 20 minutes in, trying to cognitively think about, where is this accent from? I ended up in Pennsylvania. Northern Pennsylvania was my thinking. Yeah. And I finally just asked, so you're not from around here, right? No, Maine. Yeah. I moved down about 4 months ago. So I was off, but I was kind of in the middle. Yeah. So I knew that you were not from here, but I couldn't figure out where you were from. But it made a difference. Yeah. And it was a barrier, I think, until I mentioned it. Then he kind of joked about it afterwards. So I'm glad I mentioned it. Yeah. But yes, I have no doubt that I've experienced that when I travel. Especially out west.
Which is interesting to me because, at least to me, you don't have a very noticeable accent. And I've heard Mom talk about, Mom has an accent, right? But you don't, and no. I, for the most part, don't. And Emmett doesn't.
No.
I don't know, I just find that interesting.
Yeah, I can't explain that one either.
I can't either. Linguistically, we should have an accent, but we don't.
No.
And that's odd. I think people from around this county have a variation of different accents.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because in my family, most people from my family have a pretty strong Appalachian accent. But people who live next door, they don't.
Yeah.
So it's an odd.
You have this merging of Scottish and German. That's what we have here in this region. Yeah. Primarily Scottish. So, mix Queen's English, Scottish, and German, and you get what you get.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear the different linguistic registers that people use, different phrases that they favor, and different words that someone in California might not even know exist. We use every day.
Like naps, or crackers,
soda, pop,
yeah. It can be a big laughing point in English classes too. A person from one side of the county says this thing, but a person from the other says another. It's interesting. Linguistics is cool.
Have you heard about the small village in North Carolina? I think it's in Outer Banks. They call them the Horters. They still have a strong British accent because the people lived there for over 10 generations and they didn't leave. So their families moved in from England and they just stayed there. So and it's disappearing now.
It's isolated
over the past 40 years, but they still have a distinct British accent. And most people in America think they're foreigners, but they've lived here pretty much as long as any American family. They sound totally different.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
That is interesting. I kind of observed that in 1994, when I graduated. and I end up in North Carolina every day, and I was shocked at the minor cultural differences on campus and at work. It just blew me away. And I'm like, and now it's kind of just normal, where I actually feel much more comfortable in North Carolina than I do Virginia. Much more. This is home, and App State is home, but North Carolina is I feel more at ease. And I haven't even noticed that. This just happened over time. And Ethan's mom would say the same thing. When she came down 2 years later to campus, and we were together, I can remember her saying, these folks were different. You know, they kind of use the same words. They sound like us, but they're different. I'm like, yeah, I don't even notice it now, but yes, they're different. So there's really, really small things. And Appalachia is all about understanding the small things. And in my field of work, prevention and treatment, we are the target. Appalachia was the target for so many things, because we were seen and taken advantage of, because the industrial complex believed we didn't know better. That yeah, just give all these folks these opiates and send hundreds of thousands of pills through a town of 500, and it'll be okay. They won't know any better. It'll keep them on the job. Or a pill mill that everybody goes to. How is a town of 500 people and that pharmacy of 500 people, one pharmacy, staying open 24 hours a day, and people are waiting for their medication? How can a town of 500 people sustain that? Because they're not. Because people from North Carolina, Florida, Georgia is driving to our little pharmacies, cashing in their fake prescriptions, because we were seen as an easy target. We didn't know any better. And we've been treated as a region for so long that we didn't know any better, that we don't deserve better, that we can't be more than this. We can, if we so choose. If we understand that it's not about equality, it's about equitable opportunity. We have to do a better job of helping each other.
Me and Ethan, we're going to do book reviews every few weeks on the podcast, and in a few weeks we're going to review Dope Sick. Have you read the book? Yes,
I know Beth Macy.
Really?
I've actually interviewed Beth Macy.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I've been in her house. Yes. The first book that it's on the shelf here. Here's another little fun piece of trivia. So the first book I read about Beth was Factory Man, about John Masson. Then I read Dope Sick. Well, one of the doctors that she interviews in Dope Sick is in Laura Fork. Was my doctor, who had to leave because of threats against his safety, because he would not continue writing prescriptions for local people here, local patients, to continue their unintentional use. I'll have to show you the interview. We drove up to Roanoke and interviewed her. Then I was on a panel with Beth 6 or 7 months ago in Concord for her second book, which is a different story. But the first book it was pretty reflective of that moment in time. It's beginning to show its age, because the current opiate issue we have here is no longer opiates. It's methamphetamine, and fentanyl, and xylazine, and the flavor of the month, which constantly changes.
But I think what we're really interested in, they said a lot of like the high schools that are mentioned in the books. Mm-hmm. We've run at, we've been to these actual places around here that we are familiar with, and it's real stories from this place.
It is.
So
she's a very good story writer. Yeah. I can remember reading Beth's stuff in the Roanoke Times like 15 years ago. That was the first thing I would turn to on Sundays. her stuff was big, and it was accurate, and I'm like, this person can write, right? And it's pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, if you look at, my name's actually in the second book, Lazarus. If you look at the citations.
Huh. Interesting. That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
But yeah, we're real excited to read that book. We've been needing to pick it. We talked about it for a few years now, but we're probably going to pick it up and get into it. But I think you've had a few questions that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah. So obviously COVID-19 has impacted people across the world. How has it impacted the work of prevention, especially the Appalachian area?
How's it impacted you?
You just flipped it on us.
Yeah.
It's made things better and worse. I think it's had a net positive on me. It gave me time to reflect those 2 years that we just did anything we wanted, really. I was able to find what I wanted to do with that time that I had. Luke, do you have any?
I mean, you know, in everyday life, you kind of get caught up with what you're doing. It's just one thing after another. And then all of a sudden, stop. And it's a full stop. Everything's shut down.
Yeah.
And you're really, it almost felt like, you know, I've heard stories of years on my family's been here forever in this county. And during the Great Depression, they stayed on their little farm. And they farmed down here on Snake Creek. It's not 2 miles down the road. And they didn't go anywhere. And it kind of reminded me of that a little bit. You were there with your family, and you were home. It lasted all spring, all summer, most of the fall. So it's a real kind of condensation of everything. Everything condensed to like a real small, just me, you, and everybody else in the household. And you really got to, it was really calming in a sense. It was a scary time. I mean, because you flip on the news and it seemed like everything was far away. Like it was happening almost.
That's a very Appalachian thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very far away.
It'll never happen to us. Like
it's almost like Dorothy in Kansas.
When the new year had come and reports about COVID were breaking news, all of our teachers said, "Oh, it'll be months before it reaches us." And yeah, they were right, about 2 months. And then everything checks down.
And learning how to deal with online school and navigating that. And also, I'm not a paranoid guy, but I think about things too much sometimes. And sometimes I get kind of obsessive. So I had the news on all the time. And it was kind of, I don't know, it wasn't paranoia, but it was almost a real anxiety for me. And right when it seemed like a year later, like things were getting better, my Uncle Ricky died, and he was only 60 years old. And that was a shocker. So, I mean, it seemed like that kind of redoubled things again. And it seemed like after that, really, it kind of just let up. And it eased out, but there for a year, it was just a really odd time. Historically and personally.
That last quarter we had of school that was all virtual, no one did anything.
I remember.
Everyone was just trying to survive the new reality. Teachers tried to teach, but
they didn't know how.
And the students didn't know how to learn from it either.
It was a fascinating time, and all these, you know, programs and plans that people have talked about implementing, they just had to do it on one day. Yeah,
on weekend, really.
This is happening. And kids that were never homeschooled, everybody was homeschooled at that point. So you just have to.
Yeah, from the instructional design perspective, it was real interesting to watch all this happening. From a college perspective, because we have, you know, we've taught online for 10 years, 15 years. We know from that college perspective, especially the community college perspective, online instruction is what we do extremely well. Then from a subject matter expertise for instructional design, I would kind of see what's happening and go, early, that's not going to work. And what an unfair circumstance. The teachers, plus what Ethan said, the students were put in, that the system was not ready to. The system was not ready to hold that up. No system could have. Even though our society handled it terribly, the system did the best it could.
I think really the only classes that didn't suffer were like math classes, because teachers could record videos, upload them, be available if students had questions, and students were really left to just figure it out, which I think works for some people, but it also doesn't for others.
I mean, I think math was especially hard. especially when you're starting to get into like the spring of 2021, when in 2020 the workload was drastically cut.
Yeah.
In the spring,
That's true too.
they expect it was full. They expect everybody to be actually learning and doing the work.
The adjustment.
And I did the work in the spring of 2020, but the work was nothing. It was just basically a softball. It was just get through the year. In the spring, we started having real math classes again, and you couldn't, like you talk about that connection between people. It was hard. You have like little screens. You see everybody's faces, and you're trying to work out these problems with the teacher, and you've got a question, and everybody's talking over each other. It just it didn't work for me. But
I think the teachers that had the most success with it were teachers that were already trying to implement some technological aspects into their course material, and they had an easier time adjusting. Of course, it wasn't perfect and it wasn't smooth by any means, but my math teacher, he was sick at the time and he was out a lot, so he had really worked on involving technology into his course material. And I remember my math class when COVID hit was really the only class that had any involvement, because he was sick during the school year anyway, right?
Yeah.
So he had already had at least a few months of practice in interacting with the students and teaching the subject from afar.
So the teachers could use prior capacity, past knowledge, skills, and abilities to create that new path, just like you do when you learn something. The best way to learn something new is to try to connect it to something you know about currently. Find those common connections. Find the systematic connections. So the learning transfer is easier to happen. That's exactly where I think we are in terms of COVID. That we have some misfiring. Society's not the same. There's a vibration occurring that's, in terms of our society, we've had vibrations in the past. Yeah, the 60s was a vibration. The 20s was a vibration. The 40s was a vibration. Where you can just feel that something's not right. My generation had vibrations with 9/11. That was a huge vibration. But I grew up in the Cold War thinking that we might not wake up tomorrow morning because the Soviets bombed us. I mean, that was a common fear when I was 8 years old. I went to bed thinking about that. Then that disappeared. Then 9/11 came, and thinking, oh, well, we could die from, I don't know, a plane hitting a building or anthrax or something. Then you put that out of your thinking. Then this sudden stop. During a time of political disconnection and really poor leadership at all levels. Then all the unknown. Is this serious? Is this not? Is kids be okay? They can't go to school. I don't go to work. What's the deal? Then we make it through that period of time and think you're over the hump, but then you realize you haven't even started climbing the hill. And we're still climbing this hill. And we as a society, we have not determined if we're going to climb this hill together or separately. If we climb this hill separately, this hill of healing and collectiveness, if we don't want that, then a divided house cannot stand, as Lincoln said. And we have some real issues. The biggest issue is what happens the next time.
Yeah.
We didn't prove to anyone we handled this very well.
But I think it was interesting seeing what people could do with what they had, and where
That's
they
true.
were at. Yeah. And you said leadership, but the people that were really impressive were your average everyday person, the people that were at the hospital that worked till they collapsed, literally. But you talked about the effect on people. You think it's too soon to really understand the effect that COVID had, that 2 years on especially young children or people of like high school age when they were just getting into the world, the mental effects it's had on people.
I think your kids should ask you this when they get to be your age.
Because you see how the Great Depression affected the people that lived through it, or the war. It was a monumental event, and people forget about it a lot because you move on.
Mm-hmm.
You move on from it. But I think history will look back on it as a major event in history.
Oh, yes.
Everything shut down. And
Yeah.
it affected the minds of people who lived through it.
I don't think the full impact of what happened will be seen for 20 years. When people are, like when our generation, like the kindergartners who came into school when it happened, when they graduate, I think that's when you'll see full impact.
Yeah, because my great-great-grandmother, she kept her paper towels. She dried them out. She kept her plastic cups. She washed them out. What things will we do that people will think are weird? Will we be obsessive, like with hand sanitizers and all this stuff? Big crowds, will we be hesitant when we're, close contact with people? Like a certain health paranoia, or, what kind of traits will we have in the next 40, 50 years that will really stand out to people? It's interesting.
Yeah. Yep. COVID is a let's hope time provides answers to the questions we seek. Those answers, I hope so. At this point, there's a vibration occurring that's very concerning. It's a different type of vibration. You can just feel it in people. The psychological effects are there, but the unwillingness to just feel a connection with another person. It's very unusual, very odd.
Are you concerned about the situation with China?
I don't know.
Because it seems like everything's kind of ramping up. I mean, it seems like people are really aggressive.
Yeah, your nervous systems have been. So you had 2 years where your nervous system and energy level was dysregulated, and even the cycle of the Earth during COVID was during a period of time that there was a lot of uncertainty in terms of astrology, and now we're 2 years beyond that, but the vibration is stronger than it was during the event because of the traumatic experience that everyone went through. So it was not an individual issue. It was a collective issue across societies and nations. And C. Wright Mills, who was a sociologist in the 50s and 60s and 70s, said, when my personal issue becomes an issue for society, and I'm paraphrasing, society has the right to respond. We have lots of personal issues going on that's being given to society, and society's responding in ways that we have to ask, is it appropriate or not? Is it efficient? Is it human? I don't know. I don't know. I just see some very sad, angry kids. Yeah. And if you're sad and angry, you can't be happy. And you know what? They have a reason to be sad and angry and pissed off. Your generation does. We locked you in a house for a year and a half. You have a right to be angry. Every reason in the world.
So what?
Advice.
Yeah. So we ask this pretty much to every interviewee.
Yeah.
What advice do you have? And I think this really relates to what we just talked about, to young adults just starting to make their way in the world.
Mm-hmm. I would like to say what everybody else says. Find what you really want to do and have fun and go do it. Yes, I'm not sure that's sustainable. And any time I'm involved in conversations that's either one way or another, that's always a clue that you're not digging enough into the topic. Usually you need to ask why 5 times before you get to the real meat of the issue. So if I just say to Mr. Watson and Mr. Edwards, go follow your passion and do what you want. Well, yeah, but it's not that easy.
Yeah.
Maybe you find and do something that gives you fulfillment and something that can be sustained, that makes life worth living, that also gives you a chance to live life as well. One of my faculty at App State said once, do you live to work or work to live?
Yeah.
Right? And I thought about that. I'd never heard that before. I didn't know the difference. Because where I come from, people worked, or they lived to work. They did. I mean, you had to survive. Right? If you didn't work, you didn't survive. And having a conversation like this, no one had time for.
Yeah.
Because you worked 12 hours, you mowed the yard, and you fed the animals, then you went to bed, then you got up at 5 o'clock and did it all over again. Yeah. And you prayed that your kids were where they needed to be. Right? That's what you did. So give yourself a chance to go beyond just doing something. Because we tell students every day, you have to pick out a major, a job, go do it. Our educational system is designed to produce employees, not people. I would say challenge that system, that you're much more important than an employee, an economic cog in the wheel. That's what small liberal arts institutions teach you, that you're not a cog in the wheel. That, yeah, find a way to support yourself, but the only reason you exist in life is to contribute to the economy? No, it's not. You exist in this reality, in this life, to find a sense of fulfillment. That's why you exist. So I kind of, you have this debate of college versus everything else. Well, don't have the debate.
Yeah.
Find the middle.
And you see, there's kind of a pull between these two ideas of going out and making something big of yourself and having happiness in a family and relationships. How do you balance those two? Building personal relationships, but also fulfilling your professional goals.
Maybe it changes over time.
Yeah.
Especially, I've noticed within me, I've been very driven and very fortunate. The past couple of years has taught me that maybe that was okay for that period of time, but things are different now, and I don't have anything to prove except to myself, which is I do the right thing at the right time, the best I can, and move on for the next day. And if I do that, who's going to remember anyway? I mean, nobody's going to remember except me. And maybe those few people I was honored enough to share the space with, like I have been tonight with each of you, or those I'm around every day, or even those individuals that I'm honored to share some space with, and they share some stuff in their basement and closet that they've never shared with anybody else before. That's an honor and a privilege. And I do that for free because it's the right thing to do. That's where I'm at on Mondays. I don't get paid for it. I just do it because no one else is doing it. Why not me? If it's not me, I'm part of the problem.
We have one final question. It's a bit corny, but what's the meaning of all this? The meaning to life?
Just to be. To be wherever you are in the moment in time and just be in that moment. You can try to be in the past. You can't. You can't predict the future. No. You can just be in today. Have another friend that calls me the marble because years ago I said I'm just a marble in a maze, and we were kind of joking around. It was just one of those days, and I didn't know what we were trying to do. We were just in a maze. And you just have to go with it sometimes and just be methodical and just go with it. Give yourself a chance. Appreciate the serendipity in life. That sometimes things just happen. Because again, as we will end the way we started, that there has been connections of people in my existence that were like dominoes. Sometimes those dominoes fell, and it was the best thing ever. Sometimes the domino fell, and it wasn't. But the domino still fell. And it's up to me to decide. Am I going to sit here and accept what happened to me, or decide that it's not going to control me? And only the individual can decide that, and how we respond. We can't control what happens to us, but we can respond or control how we respond to the circumstance. So I think that's the meaning of life, is how we respond to the circumstance, not what happens to us, because crap's going to happen to all of us. It's how we choose to respond that makes the difference.
I think that's also like a very American ideal too, of response.
That's a very American. It's very. It's a response of American exceptionalism that is, I have more from believing in to not believing in so much.
So do you believe in the idea of the American dream of forging your path?
I think that's forging the path, forging one's path is very noble, and a gift of humanity. Did the 1950s really happen? You know, did the 60s really happen? Is America really exceptional? Is Appalachia exceptional? That's one of the academic philosophical debates. Appalachia's exceptional. Well, if Appalachia's exceptional, how can we as a nation be exceptional? Can we be exceptional together? I don't know. American exceptionalism is a whole for our conversation, but it's hard for me to swallow anymore. I'm not sure we ever were.
Is there really that much value being exceptional in the first place? Just be.
I don't know. Just be. You know, how can a nation that's only 200 and 300 years old, how can we even judge? We're just a moment in time. Just like we're just a moment in time. So if we are exceptional, I don't know. Does it matter?
No, I don't think it does.
It's just a moment in time.
Like, sure, that's great, but in 200 years?
Do you think that we're exceptional because of the things that we've produced, because of our people?
Oh.
The group of people together that's created these things that impact the world.
So you kind of go back to which is another good point to finish up on. The idea of that American exceptionalism is our diversity, right? But that term has been associated with exclusion in modern vernacular. Not that our diversity makes us strong, that we're better than those that are not part of us. And that argument can be applied to Appalachia. That other parts of the nation is better than Appalachia. Other parts of Virginia is better than Southwest. That Nova is exceptional, Southwest is not. No. That doesn't, based on what criteria? Because your incomes are high? Well, we kind of love our land and people here. We take care of our neighbors. Do you know your neighbor? Does that make us exceptional? No more than anyone else. So we've kind of bastardized the idea for political gain. And I find humor in that.
Fascinating.
Thank you for spending 2 hours with us. It's been an honor as your son and
absolutely. Thank you.
An admirer.
Well, thank you. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, it really was.
My name is Jeffrey Watson.
And I'm Ethan Edwards.
And this is the Ridge Podcast.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Instagram, and as well as your favorite podcasting app. Our email is theridgepodcast@gmail.com and our website is theridgepodcast.com.
If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you.